Let's start with the structure of a law. Let's place it within the law drafting process. We have already discussed the 5 stages in the process of legislative drafting: understanding the proposal, analyzing the proposal, designing the law, composing and developing the draft, and verifying the draft. So structuring the law touches upon design and composition. So we are somewhere between 3 and 4. 3 for the concept, 4 for the actual doing. Well, the theory of how to divide or what to prioritize within a legislative text comes to us from the past. Lord Thring introduces 5 rules of drafting. Rule 1. Provisions declaring the law should be separated from and take precedence of provisions relating to the administration of the law. Rule 2. The simpler proposition should precede the more complex, and, in an ascending scale of propositions, the less should come before the greater. Rule 3. Principal provisions should be separated from subordinate provisions. Rule 4. Exceptional provisions, temporary provisions, and repeal provisions separated from the other enactments and placed by themselves under separate headings. And Rule 5. Procedure and matters of detail should be set apart by the body of the text and should not, unless very special circumstances, find themselves within the body of the law or the act. Let's look at each and every one of those rules in a little bit more detail. Starting with Rule 1. Provisions declaring the law should be separated from and take precedence of provisions relating to the administration of the law. Well, this is quite evident, but it is sometimes left aside. Less so within the civil law world. So convenience demands a clear statement of the law as distinct from its administration. One must know the law before questions of administration can arise, hence the precedence of the statement of the law over the administration. And so the advice is, first you state the law, then you state the authority to administer the law, and then you state the matter in which the law is to be administered. This is very much a civil law tradition that has now begun to infiltrate the common law world as well. So if I am attempting to introduce a body that will measure air pollution, I first need to state what the law is. So what is considered to be air pollution, what is the maximum, what is the minimum, how is it measured, and then I will move on with establishing the new body, the new agency. It is quite tempting to do the opposite, but the drafter should rein the desire back in to start with the body, and really we should start with the substance. Substantive law first, administrative law later. Rule 2. The simpler proposition should precede the more complex, and in an ascending scale of propositions, the less should come before the greater. It makes perfect sense. So first we start by introducing the offense of assault, and once this is done, we can then move on to aggravated assault. Rule 3. Principal provisions should be separated from subordinate provisions. Now, this distinction is not about substantive law versus administrative law. Principal provision in any text is the provision that carries the first regulatory message. So we prioritize provisions on the basis of what it is we need to tell our users so that they can partake in the regulatory effort of which legislation is a tool. So subordinate provisions must be placed toward the end of the legislative text, whereas principal provisions should occupy their proper position in the narrative of the occurrence to which they refer. So principal provisions declare the material objects of the law or the act, whereas subordinate provisions are required to give effect to principal provisions. Now, why are we placing principal provisions in the beginning? Well, we're learning from advertising, where we know that the attention span of our readers, our users, is approximately 6 minutes. Within those 6 minutes, it makes enormous sense to punch them with the main regulatory message so that this is well heard by the users of legislation. Think about that next time you start introducing a piece of legislation full of a huge preamble or a large number of preliminary provisions. They chew away the 6 minutes of attention span that your users will offer you. Rules 4 and 5. I think they are self-explanatory. So exceptional provisions, temporary provisions, any repeals must be separated from the other articles or enactments. They must be placed by themselves and under separate headings. Why? Because they make a specific point that we need to alert the user to. Similarly, with Rule 5, procedure and matters of detail should be set apart by themselves and should not find any place in the body of the law or the act. So this explains why we are using schedules or annexes in legislation, even delegated legislation. Matters of detail should not really confuse the text. They should be set apart in order to allow the user to concentrate, to use their 6 minutes of attention span to the actual body of the text, which prioritizes and sets out each of the regulatory messages in the legislative text.